So just a few housekeeping things. As if you have questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll have some time at the end for questions. Additionally, we love to hear who everyone is today. So if you would introduce yourself in the chat, just with your name, if you're with a company or you're a student, and what brought you here as well. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Beth.
Awesome. Thanks, Leanne, and welcome everybody. We are excited, and thank you, Leanne, for your leadership as well at UNC Charlotte, and these disability at work sessions. They are so important, and just really confirm that the work we do every day is resonating, right, with colleges and universities like UNC Charlotte and with employers like Bank of America that take time to step into these conversations that we're going to have today, to share lived experience. And that's exciting for me because I've been in this work for a number of years. And so it's just exciting to be a part of an event like this. So thank you. So with that, I want to welcome, as Leanne said, my name is Beth Butler Fadel, Executive Director of Disability in North Carolina. And we are a private nonprofit supporting employers across North Carolina that are all focused on topics like the one we're going to talk about today. And that is, how do we create cultures that are inclusive of people with all types of disabilities? And today's focus is on that neurodivergent candidate, the neurodiverse individual. And so very, very excited to get started. So let's open it up. I know we've got Lenore Culpepper with us, and Lenore, you're Senior Vice President of Consumer and Small Business for Bank of America. And then we also have Diana Nicholson, who is Senior Vice President of Global Risk Management. So welcome to today's conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I think I'll go. So I've had the pleasure of being with Bank of America for 24 years. I'm originally from Dallas, have been in the Carolinas for about 2 years. I am a senior vice president. My territory is the Carolinas to Philly. I have the pleasure of supporting 8 market leaders that support local small business bankers that support clients that revenue is roughly about startup to about 20 million. I am a person with ADHD. I'm also a mom to 2 children that are on the spectrum. And I look forward to just having a very healthy discussion on how we thrive and how we communicate. And so just thank you so much for the opportunity to take time for the next hour and a half together.
Great. Thanks, Lenore. And Diana, do you want to open us up? Tell us a little bit about yourself. She may be on mute.
I think she might be on mute.
All right. Well, while she's getting that situated, let's go on. And Diana, just let us know when you're with us. And when we think about we've got 2 different kind of sides to this conversation today. One is focused more on kind of that employer perspective, right? And we talk a lot about the business culture and ways that we navigate discussions around accommodations and really creating that cultural corporate culture environment, right, where individuals feel comfortable disclosing their neurodiversity and then really identifying the needs that they have within that environment. And then the second part of our conversation is going to be more that lived experience, that personal perspective. So if we think about the idea of strategies that employers can use, right, to ensure that for example, their processes, their interview processes are accessible and inclusive for all neurodivergent candidates. What is Bank of America doing in that space in terms of, again, that interviewing process and ensuring that a candidate that is neurodiverse has a good experience during that interview? Lenore, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I saw Diane was off mute, so I wanted to give her an opportunity, and then I could go next. Thank you so much, Diane. So I'm so glad to be with a fellow team.
Okay, can you guys hear me now?
We can.
Okay, awesome. I thought I succeeded, but wasn't totally sure. So to back up for a second on my introduction, my name is Diana Nicholson. I'm with the Global Compliance and Operational Risk portion of the bank, and I support all of the call centers and collections businesses for the Consumer and Small Business Bank. I've been with the bank for about 15 years and located in Charlotte, North Carolina. And to Beth's question in terms of what is the bank doing to help towards neurodiversity candidates, one of the big things that the bank has done is started up a partnership for neurodiversity at Bank of America that focuses on doing interviews on more of a skill-based interviewing style for neurodiverse individuals. And there are various recruiting events that go through that partnership. I think they tend to be timed around graduation timeframes. In addition to that, one of the big things I've seen, especially post-pandemic, has been the expanded ability to have some input into method of interviews. A lot of folks with neurodiverse conditions can sometimes have a harder time in person or on WebEx with the eye contact and, not twitching and everything else that we have a tendency to do. And I've noticed a lot of stuff being a lot more open for phone interviews since the pandemic. And I think that's really been helpful, especially for neurodiverse individuals.
Okay.
And there's a couple of things I would add to that, and I completely agree. I think part of we start for me is education. Going throughout my journey, I wasn't diagnosed with ADHD until I was in my 30s, but I knew there were certain things about me that were a little bit different on the way I responded. And some of it I learned by bumps and bruises along the way. So when I think about my 8 market leaders, is providing education of tips and things to lean into as they're going through the interview. Also creating a comfortable environment. There's ways that we're very fortunate to have really good HR department that they're able to ask questions up front of preferences. Like Diane spoke about earlier, would you prefer phone? Would you prefer in person? Providing an agenda of, okay, this is what you could expect throughout today. Is there anything that you would like to add or be able to be there? I think being clear and direct. One of the aspects of creating a great environment is when you're reading the body language and you have self-awareness, if the question you're asking wasn't directly answered, it's giving the benefit of the doubt and being able to rephrase it or be able to clarify to unlock the treasures inside that candidate, to really understand if they have the competencies, the strengths, the ability to do the job, by being able to pose a question 2 or 3 different ways to be able to create that safe environment. The other thing that I've learned throughout the years, and very grateful that Bank of America has these type of resources, is you pose the questions to focus on the strength. Because if you create an environment that someone is able to build confidence coming in, sometimes in the first couple of questions of building that rapport is going to be able to calm any of the angst that may be going in with an uncomfortable environment. And then I would also say internal candidates, and this is just something I'm passionate, so I'll be quick, I promise, is being able to provide feedback. I think feedback is a gift. So when we think about upward mobility, if someone's in the door, as being able to do mock interviews, and then after the interview, be able to provide healthy, constructive feedback, and then give them an opportunity to be able to improve. Once again, going back to that clear direction. I found has been very beneficial.
Fantastic. And, so true. I think when you said to Bank of America has a strong HR department, I mean, I'm going to give a shout out because, again, my background was in, HR and employee relations over 25 plus years. And as an attorney, sometimes, right? And yeah, I mean, it's that risk of, it's an interview and we have to be consistent, right? We have to, in terms of questions, but having the flexibility, as you said, Lenore, to kind of rephrase the question in a way that is more direct, right? Or makes more sense to the individual candidate. That's easy to do, but yet you're still, walking within the lines of that needed consistency, right, in that interview process. So great. So when we think about, again, how to promote an environment, right, where a neurodivergent candidate feels, an employee feels respected, how do you foster that kind of an environment in your organizations? Diana?
I think one of the great things that the Bank of America has started doing, and I've heard of in other companies as well, is more conversations about neurodiversity and awareness. And the bank has an array of things that make it clear to people who are working there that neurodiversity is valued. There's a lot of educational materials for managers and associates on neurodiverse conditions and how to best communicate with folks who are neurodiverse. There's also a series we have called Courageous Conversations that spans across a variety of topics. But one of those topics that's been popular over the last couple of years has been various topics tied to both neurodiversity and disabilities that aren't visible. And I've noticed throughout those conversations, it has made people a lot more comfortable and a lot more aware that there are people like them in the bank and that they are supported and that they can feel comfortable being themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
So conversation.
Yeah,
I was going to say conversation is so important. And you're right. I've heard about that Courageous Conversation program. And I mean, the more we talk about it, I think the more there's opportunity for folks to contribute. So, yeah. Lenore, your thoughts?
No, there's just so much goodness in what Diane just shared. I think it's the area of opportunity of creating, like, culture is how you talk, how you make people feel, and then also receiving feedback. Some of my greatest growth moments is being able to know that we didn't create a conducive space. And part of that, there was one, so I'm thinking about a year and a half ago, I had a candidate explain to me that the environment was overstimulated. There were too many people, too much distraction, a lot going on, that it didn't allow them to bring in their best self. And the job that they were posting for wasn't going to have a lot of distractions. So I think it's also being intentional about any candidate. How do you create the best environment to allow someone's treasures to be unlocked and to be able to communicate effectively? And I think it goes back to the preparation that we all do, is what do we know? What do we need to know? And having that consistent format, but being able to grow and to know that, are we reviewing our interview processes? Diane brought up what we did pre-COVID, post-COVID, and what is the hybrid approach today to be most effective? And one thing we use a lot at the bank is that, purity of intent. If you truly believe that all people have value and can contribute, which is ingrained in our culture, then you create an environment that they could bring their whole self and be able to thrive and be able to provide that level of recognition and reinforcement. That not only just getting in the door, that's a huge part of my passion, is that continued career advancement and being able to have a pathway to do that. And so I think another way of going about that is sponsorship and mentorship. Because if you think about where you're at today and where you want to go, there could be additional skill sets needed. There could also be other people if we think about a lot of way a corporate setting works, its network is very important. We use the term social capital. So creating an environment to also help them build, all of us be able to build that social capital, that network, and that sponsorship, and then being able to highlight those strengths. I found that to be extremely beneficial because it creates that level of endorsement by the proven track record or the areas of strength that they bring to the table.
Yeah. Absolutely. And, you know, I'm going to hit on this as well, because I hear the passion in both of your voices. And, you know, we often remind the businesses that we work with that these programs and these initiatives are as much about the employees as they are about the candidates that you're trying to pull in. And you mentioned in your introduction, Lenore, that you're the mom of two neurodiverse children. And so what does this, you know, working for a company that is pouring into these efforts, what does that do for you as an employee of this company?
I love that question, by the way. So first, you know, I think about Jonathan. So Jonathan is my 13-year-old. So where he was when he was born, where he was as 5, where he is at 13 is different. The first thing that Bank of America did by being able to work for a company that has support, education, courageous conversation, is it provided education to me on early intervention and techniques and strategies. So the first thing that I would say my loyalty 24 years in, and I plan on retiring, is when I was going through that life event of the unknown, and you're told your child has autism, you know, he was nonverbal till he's 5. They had resources to walk me through books, education, counseling. I wasn't before that. I wasn't aware that there was programs starting as early as 3 with the school systems, and because of that early intervention, he's now considered a savant, straight A student, has social adaptability. There were certain things that I learned and grew as a leader through him. It was very hard for him to read body language. So the bank had sent me a book on teaching people to be able to read body language. So we had little simple things like, okay, when someone's sad, when someone's frustrated, it was learned behavior. It was not natural, that social awareness, but he grew with time. And then it also allowed me as an employee to feel like, is there areas that, with the stewardship I've been given and the leaders and the associate and the community, that other people could benefit from the same level of education, of being aware of maybe conscious or subconscious bias we may have. And so that's one thing that I feel like the bank has done in an incredible way. And what we call courageous conversations, what they are, to break it down, is you talk about in a room, and a lot of times it could be lunchtime or it could be an evening event, a panel very similar to this. And we talk about biases, or we talk about challenges, and we provide awareness. So then there's accountability, because sometimes people aren't aware that they may have unconscious bias. And so being able to provide that level of education and how other people may feel, and that shared experience, that allows us all to be better as we show up and create an environment that all people can bring their whole self, regardless of the disability, the background, and environment. And so that's really one of the things I love most about Bank of America. It's not only had me be a better community leader, but it's made me a better wife. It's made me a better mom, just with that level of education and having those comfortable, uncomfortable conversations.
Thanks, Lenore. You know, and that is exactly it. I mean, we talk so often about the value of the employee resource groups or the business resource groups. You know, that is exactly why those conversations are so important. The resources and the network of support that you talk about, you just never know when you're going to need that support. And so just fantastic testimony to the value of those programs. Diana, when we think about, and you mentioned you oversee a lot of the call center, right, environments. That's a big population of employees, all of which, right, again, great opportunities for neurodiverse candidates. When we think about navigating that accommodation conversation, right, and the balance that we need to have in maintaining that level of confidentiality and that privacy, how do you navigate, or what those types of discussions around accommodations and kind of balancing that need for confidentiality?
So I'm going to come at this one from two angles, both from the how do I handle it as somebody who needs accommodations, and how have I handled it throughout my career, and how do I handle it with my people and people more broadly across the organization. In terms of my own career, I have always tended, I think, especially after I started working in corporate and moved out of the financial centers, I've been in a position where I was always very upfront with at least my direct manager. And part of that is because, along with my ADHD, I also have some auditory processing problems. So anytime that I'm not on the phone, I have noise canceling, like gun range headphones on all the time. And it is a noticeable thing, especially, as you're earlier on in your career and you're in sort of the open cube settings as opposed to closed door offices. So it's something that I've always chosen to be upfront about. And over the years, I've seen a lot more accommodations come into place that maybe didn't exist 15 years ago. And for my employees and folks in the businesses that I support, I think a lot of it comes down to awareness, and making sure people know what the options are and know how to go about getting to those options. So some of the options that the bank and other companies have are: you can get noise canceling headphones, you can get preferred seating, you can get accommodations to work at home if the area or the group that you're with is otherwise sort of too stimulating an environment. You can get changes made to your lights in your office, so that they are dimmer, if you've got light sensitivities. And the biggest stumbling block I've noticed with folks is just awareness on what are the options and how do you go about going through the process. So it's something I work into my team meetings. I work with my leaders in the businesses that I support in terms of: here is what's out there, here's how you go about the process, and here's, without any direct names, like, here are examples of how people have succeeded at this previously, because people need to feel good that it's not a shot in the dark as opposed to you're protected. And I think that's the other thing to remember is now things like dyslexia and ADD and autism are covered by the ADA. And so you've actually got legal protections around this stuff. And when in doubt, don't feel bad reminding somebody about those legal protections.
That's great advice. And yeah, I love that you mentioned, again, the definition of disability has expanded. Things that are in play today, like you said, 15 years ago, we weren't talking as much about this. And so it is. And I also love the proactiveness that you talk about, right? That you've kind of led with that, in terms of letting your manager or immediate manager, supervisors know ahead of time. We get that question a lot, especially the time that we spend on college campuses. It's a lot easier to manage and navigate that process ahead of time as opposed to when you're in crisis, right? Or when there's already a performance issue at play. Then all of a sudden you're kind of playing catch up to, now what is that policy? Where are the resources? Who are my allies? And so to the extent that that you're comfortable, always, again, you may not even need an accommodation right at the onset of the relationship or at the point of hire. But it's always good to have those resources and have a way to navigate that in your back pocket when the time comes that you might need that. So I love that.
At least for me, over the years, I've decided I can either be my best self or I can try and pretend I'm not different. I can't do both at the same time. And if I've got to pick between the two, I'd rather be my best self. And odds are you spend more than about 30 minutes with me and you are going to notice that something's a little different. It's only a question of, do you understand the why behind it? versus do I leave you guessing at it? So I don't necessarily always tell somebody during interviews, but I've found it's actually easier to have conversations about strengths and challenges, even if it's unrelated to accommodations, if somebody understands that there's a reason behind this and here's what the reality is.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Love that. And so Lenore, I know you jumped to this question earlier, but I want to kind of bring this up again in terms of the value of support systems and mentoring opportunities. I know we've got some businesses that really have put in a formal kind of an onboarding process that creates that mentoring opportunity right out of the gate for individuals that are transitioning into a new work environment. Yeah. Does Bank of America have a similar program or opportunities?
Yes, and they come in multiple different ways. I want to go back and just re-emphasize something that Diane said that I think is really important. I think education and awareness in a safe environment where it doesn't become an event proactively has to be ingrained in our culture. So, and Diane, we've got to connect because I love it. One of the things that I do is we have a monthly all hands call, and I provide benefits and features to a month. And so part of it is like, hey, did you know? And it's the ones that are uncomfortable that most people didn't know to ask for, that could be chair, could be lighting, could be different things that are happening. And it's just mixed within our culture. And then on a quarterly basis, being able to have like a spotlight explaining what's out there. And then the other thing that you brought up, and I promise I'm going to get to mentorship, but I just think there was so much meat in what was there, is I think it's important for us to educate ourselves first, but I think it's also important to be educating the early signals. Like if you notice that you brought up the point of sometimes too far along when there's a performance declining situation, I think it's really important for early intervention and be able to lean in and treat it just like we treat all situations, like putting that associate in the center and seek to understand them to be understood. A lot of times what I've seen, that's a great way where accommodations can come in. And the benefit is providing awareness that there's an HR team that they could be able to talk through that's confidential, that will not be shared if they don't want it shared. Because there's a lot of even just diversity of thought of, do they want to go on record? Do they not want to go on record? What would that look like? And I know for me, it probably was 4 years in my career before I told anyone I had ADHD. But when I did, I had 5 people call me. 3 of them were crying and said how much that impacted them. So there's times that I'm vulnerable to pave the way for others, to also talk through strategies and what that's going to equal. And that came through mentorship. So one of the things that Bank of America does, we have over 10 different employee networks where you're able to bond cross line of business and lean in on professional development. They call it the Power of 10, where there's different leaders that bring 10 people together on a monthly basis and create an environment that's what's shared in the Power of 10 is shared in the Power of 10. It doesn't go anyone else. And people are able to share from their experiences. And then we have numerous different types of sponsorship, mentorship, some that you could self-select into and others that your manager can nominate you for. So I think it's an area of opportunity that it takes a community. And then when we think about all of us, we act and live in the Carolinas. So what outside networks are important on how we bond and how we connect and encouraging people to have that support system. Right before this call with my team, I do something called a fireside chat. And it's an hour that I spend with each market once a quarter. And what we talked about literally 30 minutes ago was the power of a network. And we use the point of a support system. Who's your coach? Who's your friend? Who's your accountability partner? Who's your teammate? And being able to take time to talk through. And that applies to all associates. And I think it's just constantly putting that in front of it, is that you are not in this alone. Many hands make the workload light, and anything that great has happened, normally it was more than one person that had a part of someone's journey. So that encouragement is that all associates have a level of sponsorship, mentorship, and then also that they're giving back. So we call it reach up, reach out, reach down, and reach across.
Fantastic. Yep, I love it. Anything to add?
Yeah. One other thing we've got on some of those leadership programs and affinity networks and mentorship is Bank of America within the disability network has a neurodiversity network specifically that hosts a lot of events and also occasionally has official mentoring programs that go on, and is, regardless of whether or not they happen to be having an official networking or mentorship program going on at any given time, their events and activities are great places to get to know other people who are either personally or through family and friends impacted by neurodiversity. And for folks thinking about their career and how to set yourself up for success wherever you land, I highly recommend that over your career, you try and build some mentors with, or gain some mentors who are neurodiverse. Because it's something where you can both have a more open conversation sometimes. And it's, I've noticed over time, getting feedback from somebody who is slightly ahead of you in their career path, who faces the same challenges you do. Sometimes those people can help you get up the ladder a little bit faster than somebody who has never experienced those challenges and therefore may be great at whatever thing you're trying to improve on, but doesn't necessarily know how to explain it in terms where you can manage to get from point A to point Z.
Yeah, such good advice. And I mean, I think back, and I have to think way back when I was in college and then went on to law school, and that transition. And it's terrifying, I mean, as a person that had low vision, I'm legally blind, thinking about law school, thinking about navigating a bar exam, right, with low vision. When I connected with, and I didn't even knew it existed, the American Blind Lawyers Association, right? Who knew? But that was transformational for me, to be surrounded by individuals that had low vision or were blind, that were judges, that were attorneys, from across the country, coming together to talk about their blindness and their low vision. So totally appreciate what you're saying. There is such power in that. And so, but it is a step that I had to take, right? It's a step a person has to take to be intentional about leaning into that network and being okay with that. So great. Well, let's shift a little bit now into more of, and I know you guys have already done this, so this is awesome. But through that personal perspective, because both of you have lived experience, right, in this space. And so when we think about kind of your experience, can you share with us a time when you kind of felt that your experiences of neurodiversity positively impacted your performance or problem solving abilities? How did you kind of lean into that during an interview or some type of a work related experience?
Yeah, I could go first. This is, I think it's important to take time to reflect and think about, you said the word intentionality. I think that's really important, because I think at times when you feel like you're different or there is potential of disability, we're always working on our opportunities. And I think taking time to reflect the strength and the power and the contribution is really important. With some of my differences, a lot of times when we take studies, it says you can't multitask, you can't think about more than one thing at one time. I can. My brain goes kind of like a spaghetti bowl. So it's processing this one thing, then I move to the other thing, then I move to the other. And then it'll come back to it and I fully have processed an idea. I didn't realize that not everyone's brain worked like that. So I didn't understand that the negative. So I'm going to talk about some of the opportunities on how I responded and then the success that came from it. I realized that most people like me to stick on one subject. So having an agenda was very important for me. But then I also needed to allow my brain to process the way it wanted to process. So by the fact that I was able to look at a situation 4 different ways has allowed me to thrive in my performance. And I think part of that in small business, I've had an opportunity to be what we call a Pinnacle Award. So it's the top 1% of associates 4 years in a row. And part of it was I had an ability to be able to sit with a client, hear their business, look at it 3 or 4 different ways and come back and give suggestions and think what was possible versus just looking at it as, okay, this is one way and this is the only way. And then I've been able to bring others in to collaborate on potential solutions and be able to provide efficient processes just by the fact of allowing my brain to process and come back and pose it in a question is, what are your thoughts on, could this possibly be, versus in the past, earlier in my career, I'd probably come in and say, here's 4 things I'm thinking about. I've learned to be able to pose it in an open-ended question, even though I've already processed it in my mind, to allow others to catch up and get to what my brain's already processed, versus looking at it as a negative or as a disadvantage. That's been significant. The other thing I will share before passing over to Diana is part of the way my brain works, it has a positive disposition. If as you learn and study more people on the spectrum, sometimes it caters either towards a negative disposition or a positive. That relentless pursuit of positivity has really helped me be able to encourage others in the midst of a lot of things going on. And I think about most recently, she brought up COVID. I had an opportunity. I was the performance manager for SBA for half the country. And a lot of people were tired and they were feeling really down. Like, how are we going to get all these loans be able to approve? So not only can I have a positive disposition, but I could also talk through the process of what we need to do to be able to follow through the roadmap. So we were able to switch some of the processes just by showing what we could do versus focusing on what we couldn't. And working with that group, we tweaked the processes by 3 things that allowed us to double the amount of loans we were able to process. So I think there's areas of opportunity we could focus on. Okay, what are the disadvantages, or what are the advantages to our differences, and be able to lean into those strengths to be able to have that positive outcome.
Right. Oh, yeah, I love it. And I mean, what I hear right from that and using it as a strength, and it's so true. And I've never heard the analogy of the spaghetti, so I'm that's in my head right now, and it totally makes sense. But it's also the idea of the innovativeness and creativity that is generated right from that that processing of that information. So you're not just looking at one problem, but you're analyzing it from all different angles. That leads to innovative thinking and ideas and creativity that when you're in the right environment, that you flourish. I mean, you come up with solutions that others may not think about. So great example. I love it. So I mean, I could go on and on. So when I think about the audience today too, right? Which we've got college students who are thinking about that transition from my college experience and conversations I've had with my professors to transitioning into a career and interviewing for a position. What advice could you give, or would you give to somebody that's interviewing to create more? And you've talked a little bit about it in terms of the questions and the types of questions, and anything else that you would advise interviewers as they strive to get this talent, right, of the neurodivergent candidate into their organizations? What are some things that they need to be thinking about as interviewers? Diana?
I think varying, and this goes back to Lenore's earlier point, varying the way you ask questions is a big one, because based on how people process information, different people will do better with different ways of asking questions. One of the common examples I've seen is a lot of neurodiverse people struggle a bit with the name a time when type of question, where you've got to go through, here was the scenario and here was the outcome, whereas they will tend to do much better than the average candidate when you give them a real life scenario, sort of like a problem solving question. Say, here's what we're trying to solve for now. How would you go about this? So being able to vary the questions, I think, helps a lot as an interviewer trying to get people into the door. And as an interviewee trying to make it into the door, I think the 2 pieces of advice I'd give is, 1, aim for jobs that cater to your strengths. And for a lot of neurodiverse people, that's going to be things like pattern recognition and ability to come up with creative solutions and ability to sort of follow all the different possible outcomes at once, which plays very well into things where you're either, like in Lenore's position, trying to find solutions for clients, or in my position, trying to find potential gaps in processes or potential solutions to remediate those gaps. So definitely lean into your strengths. Don't try and conform to something that's going to focus on the areas you have more challenges in. And then when it comes to those behavioral questions that folks don't tend to do as easily with, is I had a friend who gave me the advice once of focus on 4 or 5 stories and the common questions that people ask in those behavioral interviews, and come up with stories that you have from your life that fit a couple different questions at once, and just practice those stories over and over again until somebody can vary the question slightly, and you're still going back to one of those 4 or 5 core stories that can demonstrate a couple of different skill sets that somebody's looking for.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things there, and I love everything you just shared. I'm gonna go very practical. We're all professionals that when we're more prepared and our mindset's in the best place, we're going to give the best version of ourselves. So I think it starts before the interview. As you're going after an interview, who do you know that knows the person interviewing, who could sponsor you or lean in or be able to send something ahead of time? So if there's an area of opportunity that you are better written communicating than verbal, is send a letter talking through why you're interested in the job, what you want to do. Make sure the fact that you're prepared, but it is a people business. So anytime you're interviewing or getting chances for that, is do a little bit of research, be able to go on LinkedIn, be able to connect with other people within the organization that can make a call on your behalf before you go into the interview. If that's not possible, then just think about what's going to set me up for success here. Is it sending an email ahead of time? Is it finding out who also is associated with that organization? I know for me, when I see that someone looks me up on LinkedIn ahead of time and sends a note, it's a very positive experience. Like, wow, that's going above and beyond. During the interview, what I would say is everything Diana said is 100% spot on, but pose your questions. If there's something that you fully don't understand, or you could respond 2 or 3 different ways, ask a clarifying question to give yourself a moment to process. So the fact that you're able to respond to the best. And then when I also think about just interviewing in general, a lot of times we do a lot of talking, but it's proven and statistics are saying that people feel the interview went better when you let the person interviewing do most of the talking. So the questions that you have prepared to ask them with your curious, mind is very important, is being able to pause throughout it and be able to ask some open-ended questions to really be able to let them speak, and then you're able to process, I think is really important. The last thing I would share is, as you're going about this, is that know that each interview you do is a learning experience. So especially coming right out of college, you're going to grow with each one. So taking time afterwards to reflect and say, what went extremely well here? What do I need to repeat? Okay, what are things that I could have done differently? And then I would always recommend sending a post communication, if it's a follow-up call or a follow-up email, and explaining why you feel like you would be great for that position. And then anything that you felt like you didn't fully get an answer, being able to address it in that post communication, I think also helps close that gap if you feel that the interview didn't go to your full liking. And I would say that applies to everyone, but in my experience, less than 75% of the people do the meeting before the meeting and do the meeting after the meeting. And those are the ones that make the greatest impressions. So I think part of, as you go through, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? Taking the steps before and after are going to be critically important to help your success rate.
Yeah.
One other thing I thought of while Lenore was talking is, for both interviewees and interviewers, understanding what the person you're interviewing with is actually wants out of somebody in this position. So as an interviewer, I tend to start off with, let me tell you a little bit about this role and what I'm looking for, because it helps people target their answers to, best profile what I'm want in a candidate. And if you're in an interview where somebody doesn't do that up front, asking them to just take a minute or two to talk through, what they think are the most important skill sets and what some of the critical components of the job are, I think can really help you tailor your responses to best portray, your skill set that may align with what they want.
Yeah. Love that. I love that. And so as part of kind of that accommodation or preparation for an interview, is it possible sometimes to get some information like that? Is that available? I know there's been a lot of work on job descriptions and, that's a whole nother show, right? But, are there things that a candidate could potentially ask for from an interviewer, right, prior to that meeting in preparation?
I could go first. So I love that. So yes, what I would say is some of the things that I've seen that works really well is I've had people proactively reach out to my executive recruiter or to me saying, in preparation for this interview, is there anyone that you would like me to have an intake session with? So you cannot have a pre-interview with anyone within that, but you can have what's called an intake session. What is that? Where it's fact-finding to understand what the job entails and things that may not be in the job description. And I completely advise that. There's not once that someone ever has reached out and say, is there anyone that would be beneficial as I prepare for my interview with that you'd recommend I connect with? Normally I'll give them 3 or 4 people.
That's great.
So I think that's one thing that comes right off, Diane. I don't know if you're thinking of anything different, but that's, I think that helps.
Yeah, I'd lean into that one of is there anyone I can talk to, anyone on your team or in the broader group that you'd recommend that I speak with? I think is a great one. Or to Lenore's prior point of especially if you're on LinkedIn and you've got friends in your network who are part of that larger company, just sort of understanding what is the company culture separate from the job can help a lot.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. And I think about the conversations, that we have and how often folks do that, right? And college students are so much more savvy. Of course, we didn't have LinkedIn, right, back in the day, but you can learn so much. You can learn so much, and the network behind those individuals. 9 times out of 10, you are going to know somebody that knows somebody, and you can tap into to them as a resource, and all of that builds confidence and self-assurance as you move into that experience. So great stuff. And I'm just encouraged because I think there's so much that you've shared that and I put myself back into the position of a college student. I'm thinking, really, these people are busy. You know what I mean? They're professionals, they're busy, but all they have to do is take that step and contact or send the email. And then, as you said, Lenore, you get, I'd connect them with 2 or 3 or 4 people to gain more information. So this is great stuff. I'm just thrilled. This is exciting stuff. So as we kind of, I say wrap up, I'm looking at the time now. It's about 8 minutes till 11. I know we've got till 11:30. But I also want to leave some opportunity, Leanne, for some questions and comments if that's appropriate. We've talked about the types of accommodations that I think, Diana, you mentioned the headphones that you often would use. Are there any other accommodations or supports that you have used and or want to make interviewers aware of in terms of accommodating the neurodiverse candidates?
I've definitely had lighting adjusted in my office previously. There are, and a lot of these are less during the interview process and more once you're hired and full-time working, but there are ergonomic seating. There is preferential seating in terms of get me into an area that is quieter or more secluded, less either visual or audio distraction. There is times like start and end time accommodations sometimes in certain departments where you can get official accommodations to sort of shift your work schedule to a time of day that you either just, function better, or where there's just less people around that then thereby helps you function better. Those are some of the main, and you can ask for noise canceling headphones, sponsored by the bank. Sort of a lot of the ones I've heard of recently getting used. Any other ones you can think of?
Yeah, I can think of a couple. So I would say you brought it up. I mean, it could be chair, it could be monitor size. That's the big one that I personally have helped with a lot. It could be caption. What's interesting is a lot of our WebEx people don't realize that, but we can turn on caption for communication of having that be sent out. I think
I love that caption one. A friend of mine was actually the person who got that put in on our WebEx. So yeah, you can now turn on your WebEx and see the voice closed caption run along with people talking.
What I would say is, I think there's an area of opportunity as you're interviewing for the company culture. I know we started with that and you said it. I think it's really important to set yourself up with an environment that you feel like you can thrive and be able to be a part of it. There's a lot of opportunities in the greater Charlotte area. I wouldn't settle on culture. From my experience working with the community, that's something I'm very passionate about, is really taking the time to understand who you'll be working with, what that environment is, and just being very proactive that if you're in an environment that's not conducive, taking the steps to ensure the fact that you're proactive with your career and with your interview to get to a place that you feel like is home. You spend more time in a lot of cases at work than you do with your loved ones. It needs to be a safe environment, and I wouldn't settle for less than that. Now, not everything's going to be perfect. There's going to be bumps and bruises along the way, but I think that's really important as you go through the process of interviewing and thinking about, where you want to contribute and add value. And so I just want to encourage everyone here today is put in the work, do the research, bring your whole self, and not be scared to ask for accommodation of what your needs are, because you know the fact that you're going to contribute. I think that's one thing. If I was to give my younger self advice, is be able to, we have to be our own best advocate. I think some of us on this call probably do a really good job about advocating for others. And Diane said it in the beginning, and I know we're going to switch over to questions, but the biggest encouragement I would give is you are your own advocate. You know your value. Take a moment to think about what environments, what situations allow you to be the best version of yourself. One I could share recently that I asked for accommodation and I partly paid for it myself, and the bank's like, no, we would take care of it, is I travel a lot. So as I said, I support 8 states. And if I had conference calls or different things in the middle of the airport, I wasn't my best self as an executive. So I proactively signed up with the Emerald Club. So with them taking call, I could go in a quiet room. It was a game changer for me. Another accommodation for me is I don't like anxiety and stress of things not going accordingly to plan and flights and everything else. So I personally schedule my time where I fly in the night before so I could be peak state and be the best version of myself the next morning. In the beginning, I just kept saying no. Everybody else wanted to fly out in the morning at 5 a.m. That's not what worked for me. That wasn't the best first. It caused some aches. So I know myself. I know I have my routines and my rituals, and it's better for me to start the day wherever I'm going to be that morning. Now, it doesn't mean that everything doesn't always go as planned, but what I was able to do is just say, this is why I thrive better in this environment. So this is the choice I'm requesting. Anyone have any concerns? And I could probably give 8 examples of that, but I think it's first is you have to know thyself. What environments create frazzle? What environments create flow? And how do you set yourself up for success unapologetically? At the same time, there's areas that we have to compromise, but sometimes we have not because we ask not. And it's taking time to really know, okay, what triggered this? And I know there's questions we have to open up to, but if I would say, if anything that's helped me is being able to slow down and understand the difference between flow and frazzle, and me being self-aware. Okay, this is now the 3rd time that I've been a little bit more frazzled under this circumstance. Is it controlling what we can control? And that has also been a game changer for me to continue to flow and elevate in my career.
Outstanding. I am just love it. Love the candidness and just the openness that you both have shared about your professional journeys, and just the nuggets of information that you've given this audience around things to think about, ways to navigate an interview more confidently. And as you said, sometimes it is about just not asking. So being confident in what your needs are, and then being your own best advocate, right, as you go about that. So with that, I want to thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and invite Leanne back in to give us any questions, comments. I want to bring the audience into the conversation if we can. Leanne?
Yeah, wow, that was so great. Thank you guys so much for sharing your experience. I learned so much from listening to you guys. I do see a few questions in the chat, so I'm just gonna kind of go in order as they appeared. This one kind of came back from when we were talking about mentorships a little bit. Olivia was curious about the difference between a sponsorship and mentorship.
So I could start and then pass over. So a sponsorship is, so say you're at a certain place and you want someone who has a level of credibility to vouch for you. So for example, you're going to interview, you have someone who sees your value, like, hey, do you mind giving a letter of recommendation, or do you mind calling this person that you know and saying that you would endorse me? That's a sponsorship. A mentorship is someone that you're going through life with, that you're able to talk through strengths, opportunities, and they're able to give you feedback and help you along the way. At times, a mentor may sponsor you at the same time, but a mentorship is I would say an ongoing basis. It could be monthly, quarterly, biannually, of really helping you with any of the things that you're trying to solve for.
Yeah, I kind of make the division between sponsorship is somebody who backs your career. There's somebody who gets you in the right places with the right people, or puts in good word for you in order to help progress your career. Whereas mentor is somebody who gives you personal advice or career advice, helps you focus on skill sets, and gives you maybe just a place to bounce ideas off of and have open conversation. And to Lenore's point, sometimes those can be the same person. Oftentimes, though, there'll be two different sets of people, and a lot of times your sponsors will tend to be somebody who's multiple levels above you in career development, whereas your mentors may be only somewhat above you in terms of where they are in their career progression.
Awesome, thank you guys. So our next question is from Reese, and she said, often on the job application, there's an option to disclose whether or not you have a disability, and sometimes neurodivergence is listed on that. Should you just disclose that you have something like that in these scenarios? I feel like there are pros to cons to each answer, and while there is the benefit of neurodiversity, I've heard some companies actually use that as a way to not hire people.
Yeah, so this is Beth, and you're absolutely right. It is a choice to disclose or not to disclose. Understanding, though, too, from a business perspective, why that question is on there. Many times it is about just the compliance, right? They're obligated to ask about whether an individual has a disability. So so don't I always encourage folks not to overthink that when you're going in and completing an application. That said, I think it is an individual choice. I think we've heard today, and Lenore and Diana, you may have some additional thoughts on it. It's really a case-by-case basis. I know it was for me. And I share my own story about low vision, because if I didn't disclose at the front end of an interview, my computer on day one would not be accessible, right? It would be very difficult for me to navigate day-to-day emails and interactions without magnification software on my computer. So my situation is a bit different, although it's not visible, right? So looking at me, you wouldn't know, similar to a neurodivergent candidate. But any thoughts, Diana or Lenore, on that topic?
I'd say, yes, it is personal choice. And admittedly, as open as I am with everybody I work with that I'm neurodiverse, I don't always check that box in an interview. Especially if it's phrased that way. I've noticed some companies have only the "do you have a disability" box. Other companies have a neurodiverse specific question. I generally take the life view that anybody who has a neurodiverse specific question, it's because they support neurodiversity, because they're not required to ask that. It's a less common question. And you should know, though, there is some of this that can tie to both compliance, like Beth said. It can also tie to diversity hiring efforts. As a manager who does interviews, I have never seen the results of what somebody checks in that box. So yes, somebody somewhere in HR gets that data, but the person who's doing your actual interview doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, I would just share, it depends on where you're at in the journey. So if you're uncomfortable, I would not share it. If you are comfortable, I would. And I think there's an area of opportunity when you're going into an interview. What does your audience want to know? They want to know why you want the job, what attributes that you could bring to the table to thrive through it. So I think when you're going through an interview, it's talking through the strengths and why you meet those expectations. And if there is an accommodation that you need, I think it's important to be upfront about that. But if accommodation is not needed and you don't feel comfortable, that's where the personal choice comes in. I'm very similar. I was asked recently if I wanted to do a Flagscape article about my diversity. I made a personal choice not to, because I don't feel like that label defines me completely. I think I'm multifaceted and it's just one aspect about me. But I struggled with that choice. But it was a personal choice for me today. I may change my mind 6 months or 5 years down the road. But I feel that I personally, and once again, it is a personal choice, but to me, I feel like my diversity is my superpower. And it took me years to get comfortable in my skin, that I made a different choice to do other areas of advocacy. And so that's what I would say is, as you're going through it, having that confidant, having that friend, talking through it, when you go through the process, whatever you feel most comfortable with is the right decision.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see, does anyone else have any other questions for our panelists? You're welcome to put it in the chat, or if you have one and you'd like to come off mute, you're welcome to do that as well. I have a question for you guys. What was the process like as you guys kind of decided to disclose your disability with your coworkers, and like internally, like was that an easy decision, or was that after talking with people? Just kind of curious to learn more about that.
Mine started, so I spent 3 years working in the financial center branches before going back to grad school. And I don't know that I did disclose it back then. But when I came through after grad school working in corporate, like I said, I wear big noise canceling headphones, which nowadays are actually a lot more popular because of all the, fancy headphones that people have out there for just good music quality. But back 15 years ago, they were unheard of. And the first manager I ever had, about 3 weeks in, made this comment, because I used to wear big earrings. They wouldn't fit under the headphones, so I'd have to take them off when I put on the headphones. And he made some comment one day. And it was clear the headphones kind of like he didn't know what to do about the headphones. And when he made that comment, I used that as the opening of like, I'm glad you finally said something about it. Let me talk to you about the headphones. And I think over time, I've become more open about it. One of the big game changers for me was I worked on the Paycheck Protection Program effort during the pandemic, and it was just a level of complexity and chaos that had been, you know, rare to the bank prior to that point of just, you know, rules that got stood up overnight. You've got to stand up processes overnight, and then you've got to just QA and test all of this stuff to the 9th degree. And that was a point in my career where I did wonderful on that job. It was like tailor-made for me in terms of being, the world shifts every 30 seconds and you just need to adapt and deal with it. But there became things that I had to be a lot more open with a much broader set of people, like the fact that I don't do well with emails. It is the place where things go to die in my life. And I had to start admitting that to people, because it became a thing of like, if you need me, you cannot email me. You need to ping me, you need to call me. Otherwise, like, you can just pray that you might hear back from me someday. And that's where I started being more open, because it hit that point of like, I can either try and continue to pretend that I can pull this off, or I can do the thing that everybody actually needs me to do that nobody else can do. And after that point, it was really freeing and just became a very open thing for me. And the more open I got about it, the more feedback I got from people, both people I knew to meet and people I've known for years that are also impacted by neurodiversity and had just never felt comfortable saying it because they didn't know anybody else at the bank who was neurodiverse.
Yeah, mine's come in different ways. When I think about sharing it, I think the first time I shared it was when there was a misunderstanding, because being a leader, we know that, especially as you like move up into higher positions, being brief, being concise, and being gone is a very a quality and attribute that people really appreciate. And for me, I'm a really good storyteller, and I could go down 7 layers. And so as I was learning to grow into my seat, it was probably the first time I explained the challenge, because in most things, like going from point A to point B, I put an action plan and I was able to make it happen. That was a challenge for me. And part of it is just the way that my brain processes and who I am. So being able to be upfront and share, okay, this is why I'm struggling, but this is what I'm willing to do about it. And what strategies have you used to help to go about it? And so a lot of what you hear from me is preparation, bullet pointing things out, help me be able to show up where I could bring my full self, but also be massively effective. The second time that it really came out is when I took on an expanded role, and I could tell I was leaving some of my my leaders behind unintentionally, and they were going to one of the performance managers to get an interpretation. And once again, I'm being very vulnerable. Is I had given, okay, here's the 5 things we need to do and why. And then I realized at that point that I wasn't giving it to them in bite sizes. And they didn't push back because of my title and who that was. So when I went to give feedback, once I got the feedback that they went to someone else to interpret me, I said, hey, what way do you prefer to communicate? Do you prefer, it written? Do you prefer verbal? Do you want one-on-one? Because however I communicated was ineffective. So we could say it's because I'm neurodivergent, or we could say that there's just different communication styles. So I was able to open up with that leader. It was a bonding moment of, I apologize. I have ADHD. Sometimes I work really quickly, and at times I want to make sure I'm effective. So if I ever jump ahead and I'm losing you, pause me, so that way we could be on the same page, because your relationship and the trust you have with me is extremely important. But also creating a safe space that if you ever need an interpreter, or you need someone else to come and because I wasn't going to lower my standard of what I wanted and what my expectations for the job was, but the pathway to get there, it allowed us to connect, to understand that it was unintentional, and I wasn't like reading on that social clue. So what I would say is, I think at times it depends on the circumstances, but when you truly care about getting something done and it creating a great environment. Sometimes being open and honest has allowed the best way, because at times earlier in the career, it wasn't needed. But once I became a senior vice president, sometimes people are less likely to give feedback. And I need that feedback because I don't want to lose the followership of my people. And I want to make sure that I'm showing up for each and every single one of them. And at the same time, not using my diversity as an excuse to be ineffective. And so that's why at times I've shared it, to just have that self-awareness, because we all may have some level of diversity, but we also have to think about how we're showing up for other people and the impact that may have on them. So to me, it goes both sides. You got to advocate for yourself, but you also have to put yourself in someone else's shoe on how you're showing up for them. So that's been part of my growth journey, of being willing to accommodate even my personal preference to make sure that other people are able to bring their full self.
Thank you both for sharing that. That's was really interesting to hear about your process and your experience. Does anyone else have any questions? Dr. Lee, I see you're off video, so I was curious if you had any questions you wanted to ask.
Yes, hi, I'm Otilia Lee. I'm a professor here at UNC Charlotte School of Social Work, and I am conducting a research on the career readiness among students with disability. So over half of my people we have surveyed and interviewed has neurodiversity. And I think what I hear is a lot of anxiety and uncertainty about the future, and then also the questions about when to disclose and how to ask for the accommodation and things like that. So I think it was really helpful to hear a lot of great strategies and strengths that you bring to the table, and I wish more people to come and hear you, listen to this talk. And thank you so much for providing this forum, Beth.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lee, and I know you're doing great work in some of the research you're doing there at UNC Charlotte. So yeah, this is a great conversation. And again, hats off, Leanne, to you. I know the work that you guys are doing as well in the Career Center to open up conversations for students that can come and connect and talk about that anxiety and that the wonder of what do I do, how can I prepare. That's a testament to the great innovative thinkers there within the Career Center and diversity and just again great work. We're happy to partner and be a part of the journey.
Awesome. I want to open it up one more time in case anyone else has any comments or questions. And if not, then